Diane, welcome to the news today. Very serious news. There's lots of information to cover, but you've also been looking at political agenda, which is coming into the UK.
Brian, hello, and hello, Ben, as well. I wanted to just review the Sustainable Development Goals as we know them. Debbie talked about them on Friday, and Debbie Evans talked about how they are actually unsustainable. So what Debbie and I talked about this over the weekend, and you can look up the Sustainable Development Goals yourself. They're all over the internet, but what we have created is 17 unsustainable goals. And I wanted to show how this sort of translates into the migration issue, because migration is throughout these goals. So the 17 goals, as we sort of translated them into ways that normal people will understand. I'll just read them quickly because I think they're very important. You will be poor. You will eat bugs. You will be modified. You will be indoctrinated. You will have no gender. You will drink recycled water. You will use smart meters. You will use CBDC. You will use smartphones. You will have no borders. You will not travel. You will be hungry. You will not breathe. You will not fish. You will live online. You will be censored. You will live in 1984, and ultimately you will not be sustained. It's not about them. It's about you. It's about us. So from here, I wanted to show a video that is from the International Organization for Migration, which is associated with the UN. They're based in Geneva. And just to show you a little bit about what they are saying about the relationship between these unsustainable goals, the 2030 Agenda, and migration.
By embracing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we have an unmissable opportunity to harness the development potential of migration, to support beneficial outcomes, starting with reducing inequalities and putting the right policies in place to ensure safer, more orderly and regular migration. Migration has been a long-standing coping strategy for people to pull themselves out of poverty, to cope with lack of basic infrastructure or search for better opportunities. People's reasons to move can also be influenced by conflict, natural hazards, or environmental conditions linked to climate change. And in a global context of rapid urbanisation, movement of people is increasingly taking place to cities and urban areas, enriching local communities and societies, both where migrants are and where they come from. The knowledge, skills and experience that migrants bring and gain in new places contribute to the labour force in key sectors such as health, and play a vital role in building diverse and productive societies. Migration can empower women economically and socially and help people realise their personal aspirations and educational potential. This encourages innovation, which benefits science, technology and industry. With increased earnings, migrants are able to send financial support to family members back home. This is critical to help reduce hunger and strengthen the resilience and sustainability of poorer communities. But none of these benefits are guaranteed. We can only achieve all of this by upholding human rights, fostering peace and security, ensuring equal access to justice and protection from exploitation for all. We also need to build strong partnerships in our cities, within our countries and regions, and globally through international cooperation. Migration is everyone's business. Together, we can ensure that we leave no one behind.
So we can see a couple of things in that video. We see the Sustainable Development Goals, the little sort of cartoony pictures, not just the people, but the cartoony pictures that are part of the original Sustainable Development Goals infographic, which I have sort of taken the liberty of reworking, as I said previously. So Sustainable Goal Development 10, I have called You Will Have No Borders. They call it Reduce Inequality Within and Among Countries. And this basically consists of making sure that people who are originally from poorer countries or, countries that are different from Western cultures, essentially, are the same or have the same access to things, are essentially the same. So we could go into communism here in a way, compared to those of us who are in more wealthy countries, as they call it. So they talk a little bit about COVID, they talk a little about other things, but it doesn't really apply as much as certainly not COVID, but certainly the difference between people coming from Africa, Asian countries, and so on, and what this means for the West. They don't really focus on that as much as they focus on the fact that we're supposed to be taking people in from other countries to make things more equal for everyone. So the International Organization for Migration has a graphic that is similar to the original graphic from the UN, and it shows specifically how migration relates to all sustainable goals, all 17 of them. And you can read those on your own if you really want to, but they do have the same images and the same pictures that are in the original version. And there's a lot of documentation out here, which I will put into the show notes. I'll just give you a taste of some of this so I don't go into too much detail. They talk specifically in a lot of their documentation about the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. They talk about the contribution of migrants for inclusive growth. So there's that language again, the inclusion, the diversity, the things that what we're all supposed to be concerned about, apparently, according to the UN and other organizations. We talk a lot about safe, orderly, regular migration. There's a lot about peace and security, which Debbie Evans talked about on Friday again as well. So there's the peace and security throughout. So we see, again, a lot of this language coming up over and over again. If we look at the specifics to Sustainable Development Goal 10, reduced inequalities, or as I've called it, you will have no borders, you'll have no identity, you will have no culture. 10.7 with some details on how this is going to be done is to facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people, including through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. And so this goes into some more detail again, as to how we're going to do this. By 2030, we will reduce to less than 3% the transaction costs of migrant remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. So we're doing what we can to decrease the cost and increase the number of people that are being moved around, essentially. This is about replacement migration. So this replacement migration document is from the UN. It's something like 350 pages long with an incredible amount of detail in different languages. So you can look that up yourself, but just basically a couple of points from the executive summary, which is to say this is what they're doing is moving people around to address the solution of aging populations. And you can see also in that graphic as well the details of how the UK will result in a couple of different scenarios going up to 2050. So if we look at 2050, if we have no migration, if we have migration along with replacement and so on, the descendants of people who migrated here, and to show how that influences the population of the UK. The World Migration Report 2024 is another 300-page document. We see that the countries separated out by men and women, the people who have left their native countries and where they have gone to. Now, you can see, obviously, the United States of America has by far the most. They are much bigger than the UK, obviously, physically. I would say a lot of those do also as well come from Mexico due to the crisis that they have at the southern border at the moment that Kamala Harris was supposedly in charge of for the past 4 years, but never did anything about that. But we see the UK does have quite a few coming in, especially in relation to the size of the UK and the population, the indigenous population that was already here in the first place. The strategic plan for the International Organization of Migration from the UN from 2024 to 2028 for the next 4 years. So this is just the start of it. Has all of these different reasons for migration. The Global Compact for Migration is something that the heads of states from around the world who are UN member states agreed to. There is a website where you can read specifically what the UK has done in relation to the Global Compact for Migration. They've very much bought into it, despite the Tories in recent years talking about how they were going to control migration. We can see what's actually truly happened. So there's a lot of detail about that and how this all works together. So this is coming in the next 4 years. Again, there's more information. There's entire databases that you can look at, geospatial information about. This is specifically for developing countries and their data about what's going on in their countries. So this is more for countries like Haiti and other countries that have people leaving more than the countries where they are coming into. Again, a huge database there. We have some other things here as well from the strategic plan. The idea of leaving nobody behind, the Sustainable Development Goals. Where is this coming from? Well, it's coming from a lot of sources, but the plan of sustainability, which, as we know, means unsustainability, is really what we're trying to do. But they use the excuses for things like we're trying to decrease poverty, we're trying to deal with climate change, we're doing all these things, basically using other sustainable development goals or unsustainable goals to make it a difference, so to show that migration is somehow going to be a solution to some of these problems that they feel that they have determined exist out there. There's another 300-page document here, a guide for practitioners on how to actually implement migration issues for states and cities around the world, for practitioners who are actually doing the work, designed to serve government actors, as it says there, and how to integrate sustainable development goals into their migration plans in individual countries. Next, we have here some more information. The next slide, please. So now we are into the World Economic Forum. And of course, if you look at something at the UN, you can also probably find it on the World Economic Forum. So I just wanted to make this clear to show just how broad this is. This was from Davos, from again, making that connection between migration and sustainable development and how migration can lead to sustainable development and address issues like floods and all of the weather issues. It talks about water issues, like we don't have water issues in the UK already. So the World Economic Forum has as well climate change information, adaptation strategies to climate change, as we can see on the next slide, please. And we also have King Charles and his, as we know, devotion to climate change. So this was him visiting the UN in Nairobi in relation to climate action and climate protesting and what we need to do. So King Charles, of course, is at the center of all this, the head of everything. And of course, we have to look at this role of the Great Reset as well. And what the Great Reset book said specifically around migration, that basically the wealthier countries have to work with the most fragile countries, which will consist in a new wave of mass migration in its direction, like those that occurred in Europe in 2016. So this is what was published by Klaus and with Charles himself, of course, in the background. So Charles said in September 2020 at the WEF Sustainable Development Impact Summit that we need a Marshall Plan to tackle the environment. And what does he mean by this? Well, I think we have just a short clip from him to hear what he said at that conference.
I've been deeply encouraged by the positive response that we've received from around the world, inspired by the Great Reset's call to action. And this is why I called for a Marshall-like plan for nature, people, and planet.
So that's King Charles now, and just to reiterate that final point, Brian, and to go back to what you've said at the beginning and what Ben has said, is that we need to refocus where our targets are. They don't need to be on each other. They don't need to be a member of the British public that feels certain ways. We have to look at where this is coming from, and this is a much larger agenda that we have to look at in a different way, I believe.
Diane, thank you very much for that excellent report. And well, you've demonstrated absolutely that the idea that immigration as a subject and with target figures, that this is being debated and produced in the Labour's manifesto, for example, is complete nonsense. This is globalist policy which is being enacted in UK without any debate in Westminster and any debate within the Labour Party itself. And this is the betrayal of the nation, and we have to get this information across to the people who think the way to deal with globalist agenda is violence on the streets. It's education we need.